I'm happy.
Okay. John Bron is here.
Better be.
Got to slaughter it.
Yes, I agree with you.
Slaughter.
Okay.
That's harsh. That's harsh.
Good afternoon, councillors and members of the public. I'll declare the agenda briefing session open at 4 p.m. The agenda briefing sessions are used to inform councillors on the items of business to be presented and discussed at the forthcoming ordinary council meeting. These meetings are open to members of the public who may request to present a deputation to council relating to an item on the agenda. No decisions are made at these meetings, although councillors can request additional information or alternative wording be provided to allow for motions to be prepared for consideration at the forthcoming ordinary council meeting. Any statement regarding any planning or development application made during an agenda briefing session is not to be taken as notice of approval. Anyone who has an application lodged with the Shire must obtain and should only rely on written confirmation of the outcome of the application and any conditions attached to the decision made by council. An audio and visual record will be made by means of live streaming of these proceedings and uploaded to the Shire's YouTube page for viewing. Acknowledgement of country. The Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and to their cultures and to elders both past, present and emerging. Item 2, record of apologies and leave of absence. Have an apology from Councillor Boylan and Councillor Capagreco. Item 3, declaration of members and officers' personal interest. We have on the screen Councillor Dickinson with impartiality interest in item 5.2.2 and an impartiality interest in item 6.2. Any other?
Yes.
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't get around to doing this one today. I'm declaring an impartiality interest in 5.2.1 for the proposed Shire of Harvey cemetery strategy, as I am a funeral celebrant, and also in item 6.2 as I'm the council delegate for the Harvey District's Historical Society.
Councillor Crispin.
I'm thinking just a partiality 5.2.2, Harvey Harvey Regional Council, just a deputy on that council.
Okay. Councillor Campbell, how's that minty?
Thanks, Mr. President. Same for item 6.2. I'm the council delegate on that committee. Thank you.
Okay, item 4, deputations. Have a deputation from Marion Lofthouse and Judy Halliday. So welcome. Welcome, Marion. Yeah, all good. Floor is yours.
Thank you for allowing us to come and speak. This is about notice of motion 262, returning the Harvey Station Master's House back to ARC infrastructure. I'm representing volunteers from the Harvey District's Historical Society who run the Harvey Museum. The Harvey District Historical Society have had a lease in place from the Shire since 1976 for the Station Master's House. The Station Master's House has been the Harvey Museum's main storage area since we moved the museum into the railway station in 1987. We've been collecting and preserving the Harvey District history since 1969, that's 53 years. Our museum at the railway station is full of displays. What we can't display, we store in the Station Master's house, or as of late, in our homes. Our treasurer has 50 boxes about this size in her own home because we have nowhere for storage. I myself have three rooms, cupboards in 3 rooms full of photos and other historical items. Our secretary also has historical items in her home.
some of the photos?
These are some of the original photos we've been preserving since we took possession of them in 1969. These are stored in boxes like this, with 50 in one member's home. All these historical items belong to the community, and there's no access while they're in our private homes. The Station Master's house is our main storage facility for what we can fit in there. If councillors propose to hand back the Station Master's house to ARC Infrastructure, who will most likely demolish it, where are we to store 130 years of Harvey district history? The photos and items have been stored and preserved by volunteers since 1969. Shire Council has had up to $100,000 in budget for many years, which keeps getting carried over to the next budget because there has been no MOU with ARC Infrastructure. We have written numerous letters to Shire about fixing the veranda with the money that has been put aside for years. After the Shire staff have done 3 years' work to get the draft to the draft stage of the MOU, a motion has been put forward not to finalise it after 3 years' work by staff. The Station Master's house has special features including timber slatted ceiling right throughout the house underneath the plaster ceiling. It's a unique feature that I don't think is in any other building in Harvey. All our large historical items are in the house. We will have to find somewhere to put them. Recently, we took on storing 5,000 maps from Harvey Water. These 5,000 maps were going to the rubbish tip. We as volunteers have taken them on and we've managed to store them in the little storage we have, but it just puts more pressure on being able to store our historical items. We are the only town on the Perth-Bunbury line still with the railway station, the Station Master's house and the goods shed, still all in existence. The 3 historical buildings of this precinct are still in existence. The only town with the railway station that is actually being used on the line from Perth to Bunbury, all the other stations are gone. I ask you to consider not taking away the Station Master's house as a storage facility that we currently have for storing 130 years of Harvey district history. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Judy. Questions? Councillor Coleman?
Yes, and I must apologise probably to the CEO because I know Simon's not here. My email's been down after the storm, so I don't know if I got a response to some questions that I asked, and those were my understanding, right or wrong, was that this was to be a historical precinct between the old post office, the Station Master's house and essentially Uduck Road. Is that still the sort of intention, irrespective of the motion that's on the table? Is that our intention to build a historical precinct there and therefore use the Station Master's house and the stuff that's in it to display? Do we have a decision on that?
I'll ask the Manager of Special Projects who's been liaising with the Historical Society in regards to that question.
Yes, in answer to your question, that has been the intent, is to make that into a, if you like, a museum precinct. And with that is also, it ties in with our tourism plan, which Anissa has especially attended tonight to speak to that. We think it's a really important area because of the grassy area. It's very close to the heart of the town, and a museum precinct would certainly draw in a lot of tourists, and certainly the local people love it. There's a lot of school trips that go to the Historical Society at the station, who look after them and show them around and give them a history tour. So I certainly think that if you do something there, it's the old story of build it and they'll come. And especially with the infrastructure that's there, we have an electric car charging station, we have the waste dump area, and with the museum precinct there, there'll certainly be a lot more visitors in that area. And I'm not sure if Anissa can perhaps just give us a general idea why we've proposed to allocate some money to getting a business case and a master plan for this area in proposing some ideas.
Councillor Bromley.
Thank you, through the Chair. My understanding is that the area we're talking about is actually under state ownership, or the ownership of the company that runs the railway. And that location, that land, is a corridor for the future. So you can, tomorrow they could come and build another railway track there if they wanted to. So I don't understand how we're planning to do something on someone else's land, or spending money on that from a ratepayer base, because our rates shouldn't be spent on things we don't own.
I suppose I can answer that in regards to, we've got a lease that was originally with Westrail for a 10-year period which expired in 2006, and the then manager of Economic and Development Services, Mr. Beach, wrote to Westrail requesting a 10-year extension, but at that stage they weren't extending the leases and they continued on a month-by-month basis. So since 2006 we've had a valid right through that lease for that railway corridor. The difference is here through the licence agreement is that we're looking for something longer term before the investments of those funds were to be spent on the Station Master's house.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my point is that is a rail corridor that could be utilised at any time because it's a state asset. And therefore, is it practical to consider expending public monies on the restoration of buildings in a location that could be used at any time by the state? Now, I'm not against the idea that we should have an historic area. I think that's a great idea, and I support the people in their endeavours in that regard. But I've been thinking about Manjimup, where they had a very similar situation, and they moved the buildings to a location which was a historic precinct, and it's quite successful in that town, and lots of people go and visit it. But it's not on the state land, and it gives us control of the area and allows us to expend money legally from the ratepayers on promoting the location. So I'm just wondering if we ever considered something like that.
Councillor Coleman.
I just, people that have got more historical knowledge than I could attest to this, but I do have photos of several railway tracks on the existing land between the goods shed and the railway station, so there's no need to demolish an existing railway station that's always been there with several tracks anyway, and a goods shed that's always been there with several tracks anyway, should they decide ever to put in a new rail system. And I'm just concerned that, we're talking about something that we don't technically own, but we're also talking about that with the Australian jetty. We're talking about it with a lot of really interesting projects. We don't own the Australian jetty, but we're looking at taking that on as well. So, we just need to be mindful that, this is for the public interest, I think, and that historical precinct is part of our tourism process.
Okay, so are there any questions?
I just want to, if I may, Mr. President, can I see some clarification on that, the Australian jetty? Are we taking ownership of that?
Yeah, well, we're debating an issue and questions, so if we can just stick to what's in front, and if there's any questions of either Anissa or Pauline. At all? Wendy? Councillor Dickman, sorry?
I was just wondering if the Shire is aware of any other proposed land use on that corridor by railways that would affect whether or not that house being retained and restored.
Yeah, I have contacted an associate of mine who is the principal engineer with ARC, and they are getting back to me on that side of things. Melissa, do you have anything further?
No, but I was only going to say that obviously if we develop that area and it does become the only existing site that is still has railway buildings in existence in its original site, you know, that gives us ability to start applying for state heritage consideration, which would then secure it more in that spot longer term. It has to be unique, it has to be original for us to do that, but that does give an option. And certainly in terms of areas that we don't own but we've managed, the Stirling Cottage isn't actually our land, we lease, you know, we have management of that site, but we already do have a number of sites in Harvey that actually isn't totally our land. Ridley Place as well.
Which we're expending money on.
Yeah, and that's just a couple. There are other ones, so there's certainly a precedent there that has happened before. In terms of, for me, the point of view is that we have a site, no matter what, it's going to be one of our most visual sites in our shire. It's important that that is maintained and beautified to an area that is going to support our brand. And it's important that because we have so many people that want to use it for different reasons, that a master plan and full consideration of it and what's the most sustainable and viable use of that area. We also have some of the only green space we have in Harvey that is close to the CBD. It's critical that we have implements and management of those sites because they directly impact on our visitors and our community being directly in the CBD.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving to the agenda. 5.1 is nil. 5.2 infrastructure services. Item number 5.2.1 proposed Shire of Harvey cemetery strategy. Questions, Councillor Lovett.
Yes, I emailed my questions through earlier, thank you, and they've all been covered. The only part that I would actually like to amend is that in the terms of reference, an industry professional be a part of the cemetery advisory group, because they bring skills and knowledge that we don't have. I have served on cemetery boards in other places, and I know that in the city of Bunbury, their cemetery board has an industry representative on it, so I would like to ask that that be amended in the terms of reference.
Mr. Lobster.
Yes, okay, so that's a foreshadowed amendment. We'll prepare an amendment for you, and obviously it can come up at the council meeting. Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councillor Beach.
Councillor Lovett just mentioned she sent some questions in. Are we able to hear what they are, just so it prompts our thought processes as well, please?
Certainly. You got them,
Yeah,
there, Councillor Lovett?
Yes. So what first of all was the potential to use the Harvey Old Cemetery to use some of the vacant land there for new plots or the niche wall. And so the comment came back that while there's not many requests, there could potentially be use some of the gardens for ashes at the South West Highway site. The Australian Cemetery has cap rock issues, but I asked if there was the potential for what we term niche rocks. So they're a concrete block or a granite rock that has a niche, has an ashes placement area in it. and so it's similar to Pinaroo, Kalgoorlie, etc. So the response was that that could be addressed by the advisory group in the future. Also asking if Spring Hill records can be made available to the Shire for inclusion for research purposes. Another question was the average per annum, if it could be reworded or removed, because it just doesn't read well. And regarding the use of Intramap, so that they're open to the public to search for grave sites. So the response was that the intention is to keep on undertaking GPS pickups and to make that publicly available. I also queried if the term disposal could be replaced with placement, as that is the correct term for ashes being located, and the comment was that that will be changed in the final document. And also about Harvey Lawn Cemetery requiring significant work, and the response was that improvements will be incorporated in the annual upgrades. And also regarding Australian Cemetery, whether or not the actual grave numbers could be updated, because they're currently very difficult to see, and that will be considered as well. And then my other question regarding the inclusion of an industry representative to the COG.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Dickinson.
Sorry, and I apologise, I didn't forward this question through, but I do know that there's ashes that have been interned at the St Nicholas Heritage Church, and I believe that the Catholic Church at Australind also has an area for ashes to be interned as well. So just wondering whether we acknowledge other sites in the Shire, even though they're not managed by the Shire, but they are available for the interment of ashes.
Yeah, look, through the chair, at that stage, I wasn't aware of that. But look, if you can send that information through, I'm sure we can just add that to the document. And thanks for sending the plans through too. We've actually got those, we actually supplied those plans to them.
Yes.
and we've actually broken those down even further with names and everything on those things, so I can show you later.
Yep.
Yeah.
Councillor Dickinson.
Could there also be an acknowledgement that the local history groups have been very involved in the maintenance and presentation of the cemeteries, in particular the Australind Cemetery, because the archway, the niche wall, the fencing on either side of the path and the signage that's currently there were all done by the Australind and Districts Historical Society?
Yes, and also I'd like to acknowledge Amy Pitts, who's over there. And I prepared a rough Word document of the strategy, and Amy did her magic and weaved her magic and put it into the document that's in the attachment. So thanks, Amy.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.2.2. Councillor Coleman. Questions? Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr. President. Can I ask that this item be considered with our confidential items at the end of the meeting be dealt with behind closed doors? Reason being that we're dealing with some financial budgets and staffing issues as well around this, and I'm suggesting that there may be some questions along those lines as well.
Yes, that's fine, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5.3 is nil. Item 5.4, corporate services. Item 5.4.1, listing of accounts paid August 2022. Any questions, councillors? Item 5.4.2, financial statement as at 31st of August 2022. Any questions? Item 5.5, community and lifestyle. Item number 5.5.1, Shire of Harvey Early Years Advisory Group. questions, councillors? Item 5.5.2, Shire of Harvey Wisdom Council. Councillor Campbell.
Is there an age limit on this for councillors to nominate?
Declare an interest. I do have a serious question.
Councillor.
That was serious.
Not sure how to phrase this without upsetting anybody. Are we taking on this Wisdom Council? This is a new committee, as it were, or an advisory group. Are we stretching ourselves too far? Are we getting involved in areas that probably state government should be getting involved in rather than at the local level? And I don't know the answers to that, that's why I'm putting it out there. But we seem to have an awful lot of work, and every time we come, we've got a new advisory group that we've got to manage, resource, and obviously listen to the advisory group and take those recommendations on board, I guess.
Oh, thank you, Councillor. And through the chair, I do have Amy Pitts in the room. She can, I'll invite her up to respond to that while she's making her way up. There is no current legislation specific to an age-friendly community. It's mostly around guidelines and regulations. However, this has very strong crossovers with our access and inclusion legislation. So it is an important area that we do need to include, and then I'll just throw over to Amy for the rest.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question through the chair. The group will, or the council will also help with the rollout of and implementation of the strategies. So we'll seek them as a consultation body in terms of when we're actioning projects or programs, and also just in terms of a sounding board to make sure that the information that we're providing to the community is what's required.
I'm not convinced, but thank
you. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item number 5.5.3, self-supporting loan, Leschnall Men's Shed. I have two questions from Councillor Coleman.
And they were answered, thank you very much. I did ask if the indicative repayments will they have to sign a legal agreement if the loan is dispersed with them, to them, and if it was paid half yearly, was the amount in total to them 6,514, or was it in fact 3,257 paid half yearly? The total is 6,514, which equates to $501 a month, and my query was more around do we feel that they have the capacity to repay the loan without stretching them based on their current fundraising or whatever, and that's been duly answered by Sunil. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 6, notice of motion for the following meeting. Councillor Campbell requests that the following notice of motion be placed in the ordinary council meeting agenda 20th of September 2022. That is listed on the screen.
Yeah, do you want me to speak to? Not speaking to it, but I do have a couple of questions surrounding it. I'm not sure who provided that comment. Is staff here today to respond to that, or
that was the manager of environmental health that provided that?
Oh, okay then. All right. Because just they spoke about the SCS building being medium. Classified as a medium risk with asbestos. So my question is that SCS building with asbestos currently being utilised for anything? at the moment?
No, it's not, but Manager Special Projects, can you please outline the requests that we've received in regards to the use of that building?
Yeah, so we've been looking at that building. The main reason is to assist with the storage issues that the museum have been experiencing. So I've been around there with the manager of building. We've looked at the building just from the needs for maintenance and how the Historical Society could get involved through sort of busy bees and so on. At the moment, we've reached the point where we need to actually get an engineering report sorted out on that. We do know that there are asbestos issues, so that needs to be fully resolved before we can move forward. There is a definite need for it. Not only is it the previous SES building, but it is the original post office for Harvey, and so there's even more of a need to keep that building. And we need to get a report done before we can give a response back to council on that.
Because I suppose my follow-up question to that is that this has been identified as a medium risk building, but in the response we're looking at doing Christina Street, which is a low risk. So I'm just asking why in our asbestos program are we looking at low risk buildings over buildings that have been identified as medium risk?
And I can't answer entirely for the team who were involved in this, because there are a number of us, there are about 5 or 6 of us involved there. But there's a very limited budget we have this year to address some of our pressing asbestos issues. And Christina Street was identified as the one that could be resolved immediately with our budget for this year. Subsequent investigations have found that the issue of asbestos at that building have been resolved, and we'll probably either then move that budget to look after the SES building or the station master's house, at least to start addressing some of the issues. But that has to be, it's not my decision, there are about 6 of us who take that decision.
Okay. And I suppose my last comment is surrounding the, and it is a comment, I'll try and phrase it as a question, but the bottom of the comment provided there says that words to the effect that no further reports being made to council. So I would like to see, I think, a simple annual report that indicates the stage response to addressing asbestos removal in buildings throughout the Shire, how that is, what mechanism or reporting mechanism is used. I'll leave that to staff, but I'll be making an amendment to suggest that I want an annual report coming to council so that we can make sure that we've got enough funding in our budget to address asbestos, particularly as it's been highlighted through the community of late.
Councillor Beach.
Yeah, I was trying to catch your eye before Pauline left the rostrum. Just on the SES building, last use by the SES before they moved to the new place, I was in there and the floor has subsided quite considerably. Has that been rectified yet, or does it still need restamping, I guess, to get it level?
So that's part of the reason why we haven't moved to get something organised with that building, because we need to get a structural engineer's report on the footings.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And my other question is probably to the staff on a governance issue with this notice of motion of Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell put the motion, and the reasons, and then staff put a comment is their duty, I guess. But to have enough as a recommendation following that up, I don't know whether that is the right course of action. It seems to influence Councillor Campbell's motion, and it would be up to council surely to make any amendments that it sees fit and not adopt an officer's recommendation. But again, I'm shooting blind, and I'd just like a comment if that was okay. Because I noticed there isn't one for Councillor Bromham's report.
Through the chair, I would probably consider it would be within the auspice of council to either leave the motion as it is or move towards adopting the officer's recommendation.
My statement was, I guess, doesn't that officer's recommendation seem to influence the original motion?
Through the chair, yes. However, I think it's within I suppose the requirement of the administration to put forward a recommendation without fear or favour should the original motion not be one which the administration considers appropriate.
Councillor Jackson.
On that point, how is a motion of notice then changed to an officer's recommendation if Shire decided to go with that? Because a notice of motion has allowed for the consideration of councillors over the week. An officer's recommendation doesn't fit with the notice of motion in my mind. It's another motion, not the one that the councillor put forward.
In the past, we have provided commentary against notices of motion and also provided officer recommendation. I do take your point, Councillor Jackson, and we can remove the officer's recommendation as an addendum and leave it as is. And then if council wants to make any changes as part of that notice of motion, that can be made.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, item 6.2. Councillor Bromham requests that the following notice of motion be placed in the ordinary council meeting agenda 20th of September 2022. Yep. Okay. So everyone's questions been answered earlier on? Okay. Okay, item 7, matters behind closed doors. 7.1, infrastructure services tender T042022, supply and delivery of hot bitumen. Is there any questions? Councillors? Okay, item 7.1.2, tender T032022, supply of pre-mix and hot mix asphalt and supply and laying of hot mix asphalt. Is there any questions pertaining to that one? Okay. Okay, we will move behind closed doors to discuss item 5.2.2. Thank everyone for their attendance.